Today's podcast is with quarterback technician Will Hewlett. Will is somebody I met in 2009, and we developed a relationship, and each year at this time we get together and talk about quarterback play and some of the techniques that he sees in developing quarterbacks. And today's podcast is one of our first ones from 2017, the first time Will and I did a podcast together. He gives updates every year, and we're going to have him on later this week with an update. But this is one you want to listen to if you're a quarterback coach and if you care about how players are developed. He has a lot of great thoughts on coaching skill.
Will, welcome to the show. We're glad to have you.
I appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me on.
Coach, let's get into your background. And, what was it that made you want to be a football coach?
The funny thing was I initially had, as a player, had never any intention of coaching. I even told myself, I'm always just a player. I'll never be a coach. But then I quickly found myself as I finished up my my football career as an Arena 2 backup quarterback and realized 2 years after finishing up, I need to get back involved in the game. So I did everything I could to then find a way to get involved with football again. And it happened from a place I was working. There was a young man who was a high school quarterback, and his mom was like, why don't you come over and help coach my kid? And I did about 3 lessons with the kid of just some technical stuff, and quickly realized I didn't understand anything I did as a player and couldn't really coach it. So I looked, kind of partner or find someone that could help me become a better coach. And that was kind of the inspiration initially for me jumping into the coaching industry. And it kind of just grew from there. That was about 10 years ago.
So where did you get your start, coaching and training?
Well, at first I thought I was going to be a high school coach in Florida. And I realized that financially, it was going to be a little bit tough for me to make ends meet doing that. Not being a teacher, it was going to be difficult to dedicate the time. So my high school coach recommended I contact a guy by the name of Darren Slack, who was based out of Orlando, and he ran a quarterback academy. And it was a funny conversation. I told my high school coach, hey, coach, I'm going to start my own quarterback academy. And this is about 2005. And he's like, that's awesome, but no one's going to go to it. Who the hell's Will Hewlett? And it stung me, it stung me, but I realized it's like, you're right. So he hooked me up with Darren, and that kind of opened up the doors to a not a traditional route, I would say, 10 years ago to getting into coaching. I think most people go the other way. Now, quarterback coaching in the private industry is more popular. But back then, Darren Slack was my initial introduction to coaching.
What things were you able to learn with Darren that have helped you, obviously, break out on your own?
Yeah, I think, the biggest thing I'll always be thankful for Darren, and I think it's funny because it kind of resonated in my sales career, I always ask the question why. And I think that's the approach and the philosophy that Darren had as a coach, and it really differentiated himself. And at times it would alienate him early on because it wouldn't accept the way that it's always been done. And so by having the why do you do what you do question and how you teach what you teach and asking that and applying that to every coaching problem or technique or anything has really been the key ingredient in any success that I've had, and that philosophy to the day I stop coaching will always be the number one thing. Why and how, and ask those questions constantly.
In your role now, obviously, during the season, I think you get to be around a lot of programs and observe what's happening in those programs. What do you see for those programs that are successful as the keys to their success? We have coaches on the show, and they talk about their culture and the things they do, but I'm sure as an outsider, you get to get a different perspective of that. Tell us what you've seen there.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's the one thing that I've seen that all successful, and this is the if you were to nail it down, like what could you identify as the one thing that separates winners from losers? And the one thing that I've been completely blown away by at times is the willingness of a guy that's won 4 state championships in a row to start the off season back at scratch. And what can I learn to make my season better? The next season is better. Where can I improve? So Coach Jones out in Arkansas, Greenwood, Arkansas, he's won many state championships out there in Greenwood. Every offseason, he starts like he's a student, bringing in, experts and outsiders in the industry and going around and learning on better ways to do things. And that is the constant thing that I've noticed. The great programs are willing to go outside their comfort zone and improve in areas that, they think they were deficient in, even if they won the state championship. And that's a constant right there. So the willingness to learn, I think, is a big separator. You never have it all figured out.
Yeah, that's definitely a key. And speaking of comfort zone, people in on your side of the coaching business, guys who are trainers only, seem to get vilified a little bit by coaches. There's an uneasiness, let's be honest. There's an uneasiness between a high school coach and you, where, that guy has to turn his guy over to you. Are you going to teach the things I want you to teach, etc.? Can you talk a little bit about that, what you've seen on your side of the industry? And, obviously I think there's the guys who do it right, and I think there's guys who take advantage of parents' willingness to shell out all kinds of money to help their kids. Totally. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I wholeheartedly agree, and I always try to put myself in the position of a high school coach or a college coach or any type of coach that has a philosophy, a system that they're trying to communicate to an athlete. And how would you like it if someone came in any other industry, to one of your employees and said, okay, well, I want you to do your job this way, from an outside consulting source. And even if the outside source has a better way of doing it, or maybe has a little more experience, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a good fit for the system. So the big thing that I've always tried to do is not replace a high school quarterback coach, not replace the high school offensive coordinator. I've stayed true to, I'm going to help the athletes improve from a technical standpoint on things that, generally most coaches don't have the time to work on, or maybe the experience to improve that athlete in that capacity. Those are things that I focus on. It's really, my job, my industry, the way I look at it is completely different from what a high school quarterback coach should do. I'm a technician. I'm a throwing coach. I'm a mechanics coach. I'm not a true quarterback coach by any means. I think a quarterback coach connects technique with a philosophy, and then within that system helps, improve and give feedback on errors that a player is going to make. Without being in that system, I think it's very difficult for an outsider to give feedback, even on if it's a progression or something. I think you can certainly educate athletes on areas that they can improve if they're not getting the feedback from the high school coach or college coach or whatever it is. But trying to replace them, you're kind of going down a sticky slope that I don't think is something that you should do. And I've got a lot of great relationships out here with high school and college coaches that trust me with athletes that they're affiliated with, and that's taken many years to get there, and it's been through making sure again that I'm just assisting in the process. That's I think the best way to describe that relationship between us.
And obviously, as a coach, I'd want to see that kind of philosophy in what I would get out of a guy who's training our quarterbacks in the off season. So, what can that coach expect? That kid comes into you. What are the things he's going to see when he comes back to the coach? What things are you going to develop as a trainer quarterback, in mechanics?
The things that I've noticed in the industry, and I had this a professor from San Diego State, and I had a conference call with him trying to understand biomechanics a little bit better a couple years ago. His description was that most kids that are going to come into you are going to want you to add something to their game, add on velocity or get better at this, et cetera. He's like, the reality is 90% of the work you're going to be doing is going to be undoing poor poorly coached technique. So initially, I think the best description of what I'm doing is I'm getting kids back into a more of a natural throwing state. Overhead throwing goes back thousands of years. It's how we used to hunt for our food. And a lot of errors that you see in quarterbacks and throwing athletes are taught in, whether it's by the motivated father that wants to turn his kid into Peyton Manning at 8 years old. They ingrain poor habits in their neurological pathways that control the throw, or it's the coach that's hanging on to something from 1999 that quarterback coaches used to teach that still thinks, well, this is the way to do it because it gets the ball out faster. So if a quarterback's going to come and work with me in the offseason, within the coach's rule book, so that I always ask the kid, well, what is your coach? What must you do that he wants you to do? And then what do we have freedom to work on? So I'm trying to put them in the most natural, efficient throwing state possible. So a lot of that's unlearning initially. And then it's, tweaking and rewiring their operating system for how they go through, preparatory movements in quarterback play and the throwing action. So and then educating them and arming them with that information so they can help continue to grow beyond there. And you just kind of give them a framework within their throwing mechanics and drop mechanics and movement mechanics that help them continually improve. But it's getting them, at a very creative, natural, fluid state where they can adapt and make plays on the move. I think most kids most high school quarterbacks operate on probably 70% of their potential. Mm-hmm. And so it's not that I'm going to make them a superstar. It's that I'm going to help them reach their full potential as a throwing athlete.
And that's kind of where it ends for you is working on the throwing part. I mean, you're really not going to get into here's how you read a defense or know those kinds of things. That's up to the quarterback coach, the coordinator, etc.
It should be, and I would say that if you're spending money with me, my area of expertise is the biomechanics of the quarterback position. I have a very basic and decent understanding of offensive play and defensive play. And so if the kid is going from a transitional point, maybe he's going from youth football to high school, or he's coming out of high school and going to college, or going from college to the professional ranks, my job is to help kind of bridge the gap and then get them up to speed in certain areas. I would say that's 10% of what I do. I don't consider myself an expert on X's and O's and don't want to be right now. But there's certainly a little bit there done when you got to bridge the gap where there's a deficiency in maybe coaching.
Now, I know before we started talking, we mentioned a little bit about the dark side of your industry. Speak a little bit about that and some things you've seen, and I guess maybe some bad practices that kind of give guys like you a bad name.
I think there's a lot of things that it's a fancy industry. It's a lot of wow and fluff, and my training is driven by the law of specificity. What that means is the further a drill moves away from the actual skill itself, right? So the more iterations you go away from the actual core skill that you're trying to get better at, the less impactful that drill is. And so if you want to get better at throwing the football, you need to practice throwing the football. And that seems like, that's really simple. I mean, that's a profound statement. Everyone knows that. But if we're trying to be better at throwing and delivering the ball, introducing too many variables in that action, or making it too disjointed, or something that's not like the actual action itself, you start to move away and get better at stuff that's nothing, that has no connection with the actual activity itself. Now, I understand sometimes you have to break things down and to work on individual pieces, but I always look at coaching like you have to, if you can coach in the most broad, simple brushstrokes as possible to make the experience easy and quicker and more of a smooth transition for a kid that's making change. You see a lot of coaches doing activities in sand or on ladders, and I haven't seen any scientific studies to say that helps improve quarterback play. I do know that you start to dig into other energy systems when you move past that 10-second, 8-second aerobic threshold. And so fatigue is a massive issue when you're trying to improve skill, the enemy of skill acquisition. And so I'm very careful with the choices I make when I'm trying to work on a very precise activity with a kid that, it may not be the most exciting or marketable training, but it's certainly going to get you better. And so keeping it simple and sticking to that, I think, is key. And I think a lot of coaches get carried away by what they see on social media. And, you still have to be creative as a coach and think of better ways to do things. And, I've made plenty of stupid mistakes as a coach and, trying to be impressive and realize, wow, that actually doesn't help the kid get any better. So I think that's a thing you see is that just people get carried away with stuff that's not important, that doesn't get them better. It's an issue. People aren't asking why they do what they do. They just see someone else doing it and then copy it. That's ludicrous. To me, it is anyway.
You mentioned having to undo some bad training. That's something that you're faced with in helping these guys fix their mechanics, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't think coaches are obviously doing things intentionally to mess up mechanics or anything like that. But I also believe there's so much, you just talked about the information you get on YouTube or social media, whatever, that there's so much out there that coaches get a little overwhelmed in what is the important things and what should they be doing to teach the proper mechanics. I guess what are maybe the top 2 or 3 things you see that if the coach just knew this little point in teaching it, it would help improve those players, and then you could focus not on training guys, but just getting that other 30% out of them that you mentioned that, they're leaving on the table.
So I think that maybe the first thing is just the philosophy that a lot of coaches get caught up in is that more is better, or the concept of template coaching. The template coaching is when you take an expert at something and you take their template and you lay it over someone else and you say, you're going to look just like this. And so some examples of that in the industry have been the wide base. So having a wider base is certainly beneficial for quarterbacks to maneuver in the pocket and to be in a position to pull the trigger a little bit quicker on certain throws. But you can see like a guy like Lamar Jackson, who has no concept of a wide base, is possibly going to win the Heisman Trophy. Now, he's got room for improvement as a passer and a thrower. But what happens is coaches take things that are popular or have been discovered in an industry and that's all they do. So you have these kids that come out where their bases are, 3 times wider than they need to be, or the pre-pass position, where the carriage of the football. Generally speaking, most kids are going to carry the football in a relatively natural position to initiate the sequence of the throw. Modifying that into a position that makes the release quicker or more efficient is generally just not beneficial. The greatest example of that is Aaron Rodgers and his collegiate pre-pass position, and now in the NFL, he's completely in a relaxed, lower carriage. And, you could argue that his release is as quick, if not the quickest there is out there, and efficient and effective. And even if you speak to Jeff Tedford, who was his coach, and I spoke to him personally, and he now goes, well, I don't teach that anymore. That was something that, and that's the sign of a good coach, right? A guy that's, hey, I did this and now I don't. I thought it was the way to make kids better. And so you see these little things and in the industry, and they go boom, and they get carried away. And then every coach in America is teaching it without asking, well, why does it actually make it any better? So taking a concept, going too far with it, the elevated pre-pass. And then I think there's to ID, one more specific thing that coaches overcoach. I would maybe approach it this way. When you're looking for a kid to be your quarterback, if there's substantial biomechanical changes that have to be made in the delivery to make them efficient, then they're probably not the right fit for the position at that time. So you want to look for a kid that's got more of a natural delivery, and then just give them a framework of very simple things within your system. Don't coach the creativity out of their play by giving these hard and steadfast rules of you got to hold the ball exactly here. Every kid's just a little bit different, so you've got to have some flexibility. And hey, there's certain things that you can't get away with, but I think there's a lot of things that are just blown out of proportion that coaches are gonna, it's my way or the highway, that really in the long term don't matter. They just don't matter. And that's what I most commonly see is just maybe it's a mindset of coaching that, it's got to be done this way. And if it isn't, it's wrong. If you just see the differences in all the professional quarterbacks and college quarterbacks out there and guys that have success that look completely different. There's some things at the core that are the same, but there's other stuff that they're evolving every game and every season with new stuff.
And that is, a challenge for coaches. You mentioned Coach Tedford, and, for us, we spend so much time, especially once we hit the season, on having to coach the game plan, the scheme, decision-making, that mechanics take a little bit of a back seat. I know when I coached quarterbacks at Baldwin Wallace University that I had to spend 10 to 15 minutes getting those guys out on the field early and working them through our specialist period in order to get our daily mechanics work in. So what would be your recommendation? Totally. And at least my philosophy, I should preface it by saying, was that's going to be my time really to work on mechanics, because the rest of the time is going to be more of a focus on the mental aspect of the game and what we're working. But I need every day to provide that fundamental skill that keeps them, improving or at least maintaining good mechanics, that we have to do that every single day. What would be a set of drills, if a coach has 10 to 15 minutes a day, a set of drills, I know you said keep it simple, a set of drills that's going to work the mechanics for them every day?
Absolutely. So I would preface by saying that the quarterback position is built in the off season. And so what in season is just slow regression as a technician, but improvement for feel and the tactical side of the game, right? So you see kids get a little bit sloppy as the season goes on. And in most programs, they get a little sloppy in areas, but they start becoming more intuitive in other areas, which is, direct relationship to the structure of practice and just being in the zone. So there's that big picture. I think to help the kids maintain, quality mechanics through the season, you have to stick to your guns, and you got to have time to do the little things. You got to make time to do the little things, because, what's the point of doing them in the first place if you're not going to keep it up? I think the sequence that I go through with quarterbacks to help them sustain consistency through the season and not regress as a passer. It's funny, I never thought I would train quarterbacks in season in my job. I work with a lot of kids now that I've had a relationship for a long time with on the weekend, on a Sunday, and it'll be for just like a little tune-up. But the sequence I think that's really important is that you start off in some kind of a throw warm-up where you're starting at 5 yards, you're working back to 10, and then when you get to about 10 yards, that throw, starts to look more, step and throw. And then the last 2 steps of a drop, I think, are the most important 2 steps in any drops. And, a lot of guys are done now. So those last 2 steps are the first 2 steps. But I like to work a lot of crossover plant, left over right for right-handed quarterbacks, and then plant and throw. And just keep the focus 100% on being technical. Don't make them think about making a read. Don't make them think about any of that stuff. Let them focus on the mechanics itself. So they build up this little routine that gives them a comfort zone. And you stretch that out to, 15, 20 yards, and then you start to integrate some planned movements, whether it's, just minor pocket movements that, go off of stimulus from your hand or whatever it is, but just kind of progress from the most simplest state. Maybe that's facing your partner and throwing, and then step and throw, crossover plant, hitch throw, crossover plant, move, throw, and then start to jump into whatever your quick game sequences, your intermediate game sequences in terms of your drops. And then I like to have quarterbacks throw on I think it's important to have 2 types of throwing on the run. So one is that planned run where they're going to be able to attack the target a little more aggressively, come downhill to the throw. But I also think a really good drill to keep guys in a good state is to have them run lateral, parallel to the goal line, and throw across their body left and right. And I think that's a really good sequence to help them continually build and keep the movement throws in the right position as well. It's going to be between 6 and 7 out of 10 snaps. You're going to have some kind of pressure. So any kind of movement sequence that you can create that you're comfortable doing, it's a matter of continually doing that. So I don't think there's any magical drill or a magical way of doing it. It's just keeping it focused on the technical side. Don't get caught up in the tactical side until you're in team and 7-on-7, and letting your kids get that every day. And whether it's 10 minutes or 15 minutes, that time is paramount to their success throughout the season. I do see a lot of, because guys are so gun focused now, the rhythm of a 3-step or a 5-step drop, I think, is a lost art. Mm-hmm. And I know guys are, I think there's nothing better than a 5-step drop on rhythm in terms of not even for the drop itself, just for the stress it puts on the body to transfer your weight into a throw. I think it's a fantastic drill. So I think having under center techniques is always helpful for kids as well.
Definitely. Now, the reality of coaching quarterbacks is we are limited in the time we could spend. Limited at the high school level. At the college level, we're limited even more by the NCAA and what we can do. So there is a ton of value for a quarterback to go out and get training from someone else. What could you do to help our coaches to, maybe some questions they should ask or the key things they need to look for when helping their quarterback or their quarterback's family find a good trainer for him for the off season?
Well, I think there's a couple ways to look at it. The thing about playing quarterback is that it's a 12-month commitment, and that doesn't mean you've got to throw 365 days a year. I think if you're going to compete at a high level, you got to throw more than everybody else, and that means spending a lot of time doing it. Now, Tiger Woods still has a swing coach. Throwing under a trained eye in the off season, I think, is a fantastic tool, and I think everyone should do it. So I think you as a parent, you've got to kind of see, okay, well, what do I want to get out of this? And for a lot of the college guys or professional guys, it's like they're not looking for someone to teach them how to throw the football or teach them how to throw routes. They're looking for someone to give them a little bit of feedback. So I think, generally speaking, some of the questions you could ask as a coach or as a parent are, ask them what's their philosophy on quarterback coaching is. Are they a highly technical coach? Are they going to try and reinvent the wheel? Or are they just some guys are just drill and rep guys, and they're happy to admit that. And those situations are very, very good for someone that's in a position where they don't need any mechanical adjustments made. They just need reps, and they need little bits of feedback to help them progress. And maybe that's simply a coach that likes to film and use video so that the player can give feedback. So if you're looking for that extra 5% improvement in mechanics, then I think you've got to ask, one of the dangerous questions to ask is, who have you worked with? And I think we can get very quickly caught up, well, if you've worked with this player. Let's look at the reality of most NFL quarterbacks. The guys in the NFL are no one makes them NFL quarterbacks except their mom and dad's DNA. You can have all the training in the world. It doesn't bridge the gap from making someone not an NFL quarterback to an NFL quarterback. Now, if you're an NFL quarterback, you're an NFL quarterback, whether you've got horrendous mechanics or you've got great mechanics. It's how efficient you're going to be is where a coach can impact you, right? So there's no coach out there that's going to take someone from being a kid and making them, reach all their dreams because it's a magic coach. What we do is, maybe this kid's on the edge of being a Division I quarterback, and you bump him over with, technical things. There was a kid I worked with years back who, ended up signing with a major Pac-12 school. And there's a good chance he was going to get moved to a different position. And it simply was, all he was doing incorrectly was holding the ball wrong. And so he couldn't throw a spiral. And his coach was going to move him to defensive back. And I came, he worked with me, and it was literally a 5-minute change and, a little bit of instruction on some other things that were minor. And I just open the door for him to then reach his full potential. And he goes on, 2 years later and signs a major scholarship. But find out what the coach is about. Like, what are they looking to do? Are they just a rep guy, a drill guy? They look at some guy, if they're going to be heavy on the mechanical side, well, then I think you drill them, to have them explain what and how and why they teach. And if it's one layer deep, if it's like, well, I just teach this because that's how they do it in the NFL, then that's the wrong guy. You've got to have, some kind of scientific or biomechanical explanation behind why you teach what you teach. I think that's a pretty safe way to do it. I do think it's great to work with someone, but you got to vet the process and work with a couple different guys at first to see who you like, and I tell all my kids, listen, if you can find somewhere better, go. Because, I don't have an ego in this. My ego is to be the best coach in the world, but I want to know if I'm not. So if someone else is doing it better, I got more learning to do. That's the important, if a coach is going to get all bent out of shape, if you're going to go try to work with someone else to get some more information, maybe that's a good sign that that's the wrong guy.
Well, Coach, I certainly appreciate you taking the time to share these ideas with us. I do think it's very important that quarterbacks are developed year-round, and that coaches don't feel that they're having their toes stepped on. So there is definitely a relationship that needs to be developed between that, whether it's a high school coach, quarterback coach or coordinator, and a trainer like you. And I think you gave us some great suggestions today on what to look for, but also how to find those types of guys locally for your players as well. I know you do a lot of work on the internet as well, and analyzing some things and putting some ideas out there. So where can our listeners find you and also connect with you?
Although my social media game is average at best, I'm on Twitter at Will Hewlett. That's WILLHEWLETT, just like the computer, but no relation, unfortunately. On Instagram, that's the same thing, I believe, at Will Hewlett. We'll do our best help. We're always offering help, whether it's breaking down film or consulting on what to do and what not to do. And we do a lot of video analysis through huddle technique and remote training, et cetera. So hit us up and anything that I can do to help, man. I enjoy this. I enjoy coaching. I enjoy learning, and coaches too. I'm always wanting to meet up and connect with coaches and learn about what they're doing and how they're doing it. I appreciate the opportunity very much, Keith.
All right. Well, it was great to have you on the show, and I'm sure we'll talk in the future.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you.